On July 2, 1863, while Colonel Joshua Chamberlain was earning the Medal of Honor for the 20th Maine's defense of the Union left flank at Little Round Top, another, relatively unknown Union colonel was saving the Union center following the collapse of the Third Corps in the Peach Orchard salient. The Battle of Gettysburg was in its second day. The Confederates had the upper hand on July 1st, smashing 2 Union corps and forcing the Northern troops to adopt defensive positions along Cemetery Ridge. This series of hills and ridges faced the Confederate lines to the west, and if you were to draw it on a map, was shaped like a giant fishhook. The Federal right, or the Hook's Point, rested on Culp's Hill, while the bend and shaft lay on Cemetery Hill and Cemetery Ridge, with the eye on Little Round Top. The center or shaft of the Union position was held by the Third Corps under Major General Daniel Sickles, an aggressive but political general who had no formal military training. Sickles held the Union center on Cemetery Ridge, but Sickles coveted higher ground to the west, closer to the Confederates massing to renew the battle. Believing the Peach Orchard's elevated position would give the Confederates an advantage, Sickles, on his own initiative, moved his entire corps forward to the Peach Orchard and the wheat field. Although advantageous on its own, Sickles' new position isolated his corps from the rest of the army. The Third Corps was too small to extend its flanks to join with the rest of the Union Army on Cemetery Ridge or Little Round Top. With its flanks in the air, the Third Corps couldn't stop rebel brigades from attacking it from the rear. Upon seeing Sickles' foolhardy move, General Meade thundered toward him, delivering a harsh reprimand. Sickles agreed to move back, but Meade responded, "I wish to God you could, but the enemy won't let you." At that moment, 2 divisions of Longstreet's corps, led by John Bell Hood and Lafayette McLaws, engulfed Sickles' exposed corps. Fighting raged throughout the afternoon around the Peach Orchard and the wheat field, which changed hands 6 times. Eventually, overwhelming Confederate forces crushed the Third Corps, sending disorganized units retreating over Cemetery Ridge and creating a gap in the Federal line. Sickles, in a stroke of painful luck, had his leg shattered by a cannonball and was taken from the field, avoiding a court-martial for disobedience. The victorious Confederates regrouped, and the brigade of Cadmus Wilcox began moving up the slope into the opening in the Union line. If Wilcox gained the ridge, they could turn north and roll up the entire Union line, destroying the Army of the Potomac and possibly end the war. However, up on the ridge, Union General Winfield Scott Hancock, in charge of the area, ordered the brigades of Humphreys and Willard to plug the gap left by Sickles' collapse. However, it would take time, perhaps 5 minutes, to maneuver the men into position. Desperate, Hancock spotted a small group of men behind a Union artillery battery and galloped over. "My God, is this all the men we have here? What regiment is this?" Colonel William Colville answered that it was the 1st Minnesota Volunteer Infantry, Harrow's Brigade, Gibbon's Division, 262 men in all. Hancock pointed at Wilcox's advancing brigade. "Colonel, do you see those colors?" Colville looked at the advancing Confederate battle flags and nodded. "Then take them." Without hesitation, Colville's small command moved down the slope to confront Wilcox's 1,600 Confederates. Lieutenant William Loughran described what happened next.
The regiment, in perfect line, with arms at right shoulder shift, was in a moment sweeping down the slope directly upon the enemy's center. No hesitation, no stopping to fire, though the men fell fast at every stride before the concentrated fire of the whole Confederate force directed upon us as soon as the movement was observed. Silently, without orders and almost from the start, Double Quick had changed to utmost speed, for in utmost speed lay the only hope that any of us would pass through that storm of lead and strike the enemy. "Charge!" shouted Colville as we neared their first line, and with leveled bayonets at full speed, we rushed upon it. The first line broke in our front as we reached it, and rushed back through the second line, stopping the whole advance. We then poured in our first fire, and held the entire force at bay for a considerable time, until our reserves appeared on the ridge we had left. Had the enemy rallied quickly to a countercharge, its great numbers would have crushed us in a moment, and we would have made but a slight pause in its advance. But the ferocity of our onset seemed to paralyze them for the time, and although they poured upon us a terrible and continuous fire from the front and enveloping flanks, they kept at respectful distance from our bayonets, until, before the added fire of our fresh reserves, they began to retire, and we were ordered back.
The 1st Minnesota had earned the 5 minutes Hancock needed. As federal reinforcements arrived and plugged the gap in the Union center, the 1st Minnesota moved back up the slope and took stock. Of the 262 men who charged Wilcox's 1,600 rebels, only 47 remained fit for duty. The 1st Minnesota, the unknown savior of the Federal Army's center, sustained 82% casualties, the greatest percentage of losses by any regiment in a single action of the entire war. After the action, General Hancock recorded,
"There is no more gallant deed recorded in history. I ordered those men in there because I saw that I must gain 5 minutes' time. Reinforcements were coming on the run, but I knew that before they could reach the threatened point, the Confederates, unless checked, would seize the position. I would have ordered that regiment in if I had known every man would be killed. It had to be done, and I was glad to find such a gallant body of men at hand, willing to make the terrible sacrifice that the occasion demanded."
This was the unknown story of the 1st Minnesota Regiment and their desperate charge to save the Union Center at Gettysburg on the afternoon of July 2, 1863. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more historical content.